introduction, Amy? Do you want an introduction?
I'm good either way.
I'll let you do it.
Okay.
Okay. We're good. It's going right to Amy, so.
All right, good morning. I like that. Everybody's awake this morning even. So we are here at Unity of Springfield. It's Sunday morning. We are in our adult education, New Thought and World Religion class. And I am Amy Burnett. And today we are going to be talking about the art of presence. So I always give you guys the preface. So present actually, is my Whitestone word for the year. So I thought that since Spirit was telling me to pay attention to that, I should maybe do some work around that and maybe look at some things. And so one of the things I went to was Eckhart Tolle, and the Art of Presence is a presentation he did for a retreat, and it was available through audiobooks. And so that's one of the things that I listened to as I was preparing for this class. And I think most of us are probably familiar a little bit with Eckhart Tolle. And so sometimes the most simple statements that he makes are the most profound statements that he makes. And so I hope I do it justice this morning as I share what I was thinking through, because it definitely was one of those where I always use the analogy like in the Grinch where his heart grew 10 sizes that day or whatever. Sometimes when I'm reading something or listening to something, I feel like my brain is just going, like my awareness, my consciousness is just expanding, and then for a moment it feels a little uncomfortably big, and trying to lean into that. So that's where I am this morning with this. And so let's start off with a little moment of prayer. As we do every Sunday, we just say, we are grateful for this space. We are grateful for this time at Unity of Springfield to come together and share in our journey to broaden our consciousness and to remember that there is only this now moment, and then this now moment, and then this now moment. And so it is. Amen. All right, so Eckhart says that presence is a state of consciousness that cannot be fully grasped in thought. And so he was even really hesitant in this presentation to give to say like, this is the definition of presence. He gave many examples of what presence is, but he said that he doesn't like to define things because our mind is constantly pushing for more information and definitions, and we try to put things in a box and put things in a label, and it's more than that. And his other thing he said was thought is always grasping at concepts. And so really trying to overly define what something is takes away from the vastness of what it is. And that's what he says, is that presence is vast and has no form. It is the allness that we are swimming in every day. So we can't, if we try to pin it down too much, then we're not in the present moment. We're not feeling presence because we're trying to put it in a box and trying to label it and trying to define it. And then our mind is working all around it, trying to create all of those thoughts and feelings and labels instead of actually being in presence. And he talks about the mind, is always busy thinking about the next words we're going to say or the last words that have been said. And he talked about that being, he says it's because humans are transitional beings. And so he had this discussion about when we look out into the realms of nature, animals, minerals, those things, there's a perfection in those realms. And he talked about, the time-lapse videos that are out there where you can see a flower, you can see a seed be planted, and you can see the flower, and it starts to grow and it blooms, and then you watch the whole life cycle, and there's a perfection in that. You could do a time-lapse video on 1,000 flowers of that same kind, and it's pretty much going to look the same. Slight variances, maybe with different conditions, but the process is there's a perfection in it. And the same with animals and, our minerals. If you crack open a geode, you get variances, but if you have the right materials put together in the right way, the perfection of that is that you're going to get an amethyst or you're going to get a diamond. And so he said, we as humans are transitional beings. And so we are neither all one or the other of those realms. We kind of live within several of those, and we are blessed with this thinking mind, which kind of changes the game altogether because we can think about how all of those things are happening. And so that it's not that there's not perfection in humanity. It just is different, and it's maybe harder to grasp because we don't get to see that removed version of everyone. And, he said wouldn't it be an interesting experiment to have if someone could figure out how to do one of those time-lapse things on a human, like where you would see that it was the same. And he amused himself with that idea, but he was saying there is the perfection. It's just harder to see. And part of that is because our lifespan, like when you start expanding the lifespan, a flower has a shorter lifespan, so we can see it more readily. But when you're talking about the human experience, it's a much longer amount of time. And so some of that gets lost within everything that's going on around us. He talks about our goal shouldn't be to fall below thinking or rise above thinking. And so when he talked about falling below thinking, it made the examples he used were things that I've heard described in other teachings as like buffering, or that's the word I use when I talk about it. So that's where we are mindlessly scrolling Facebook, where we are doing some activity that kind of removes us from our general thinking. So we're a little bit out of our head because we're preoccupied with something else. But we're in this spot where he calls that being below thinking. Like we're really not having so many conscious thoughts because we're just kind of distracting the mind with different things. And so in doing that, we're not connected to our source. We're in this weird space of distraction. And then he talks about our goal isn't to rise above thinking either. The idea is not that to be spiritual, you can't have human thoughts, or that the goal is to never have thoughts within your humanness and be above your thinking mind. That's not it either. It's that we find the connection to the inner self and we stay connected no matter what state we're in, would be the goal. So he said both of those other things would make us less awake, less alert, and less alive, when our desire is actually to be more intensely awake, more intensely alert, more intensely alive. And he says we can do this by living in a state of relaxed alertness, or alert presence is a term he uses. And he talks about this being a state where we're open. So we're able to look, feel, and touch, experience the moment. We are open to the current moment against a background of stillness. And that was an interesting part of his talk as well, this background of stillness and background of silence. And he talked about that even when we are in, so like in this room, even though I am talking, there's a background of silence. There is you that are participating, and maybe you at home you are maybe sitting silently, you're maybe sitting in a quiet space. So even though you're attuned in to the words that I'm saying, there's this background of stillness and background of silence that if we become aware of, that's where we can tap in to being alertly present, or a relaxed alertness. And so he says this is when we're not thinking about the last moment or past events. We're not anticipating the next moment or what will happen in the future. It could be stillness in the outer world in the form of quiet or silence, but it's also that inner stillness. And so, and that's what he talks about, that if we are that inner stillness where we become a consciousness and we are connected to the grand intelligence, you can move through life. That doesn't mean that you have to be sitting somewhere in the lotus position to be connected to that inner stillness. You can be moving through life and having human experience while maintaining that connection to that grand intelligence. And so you're walking through and you are actually seeing things for how they are in the moment. And so if we remain connected to that, it's always in the background of our experiences. We move through as a spiritual being in a state of relaxed alertness. And so what keeps us from doing this? If we've experienced that and we know that there's that connection to our inner source, then what happens? Why do we walk through life not paying attention? And so he says we let the things happening in the foreground of our lives absorb our attention. So our thoughts, our emotions, our current circumstances, our past circumstances, we allow that to become the foreground of where we are living from, and we become too focused on what has happened or what should be happening, and that we're really looking at the what is happening, what has happened, what will happen. And that pulls our consciousness away from that inner stillness and that place where we can feel that connection. But he reminds us that there is that dimension that exists in all of us that transcends the what is, and that when our true essence becomes conscious of that dimension and is fully connected to it, that's when we are experiencing presence. So one way that he talks about experiencing presence is to notice that silence, to become aware of it, to look for it in the background of activities. And he says when we're noticing silence, it requires us to set aside thought, even if only for a moment. And so it was interesting. He talked about one study that had been done that showed that in the participants of the study, they were studying thought and thought patterns, and that 99% of the participants' thoughts were repetitive. So whether it didn't necessarily mean they were thinking of the same things, but it was repetitive in the pattern, how they were thinking through things, and kind of that thinking about what has happened, what will happen, and it's a very repetitive thing. And he said, so we have all of these thoughts that are bouncing around, and they're fairly repetitive, but we give them so much importance. We think, oh no, this thought is very important, or what has happened is very important, what will happen is very important, but we're just going through life kind of having this repetition of thought pattern. And he says that's because we're not connecting with the silence. And so he said, if you think about, if 99% of your thought patterns are repetitive and you start focusing in on the silence and you get to a point where even 10% of your day you are noticing the silence, you've made a huge improvement in your connection just in moving the needle, that 9%, to get your thoughts out of that repetitive pattern and begin to notice the silence around you. And the silence really equating to that inner connection, that all-knowing presence, whatever that is that you call that, whether that's God, spirit, universe, divine mind, inner self, whatever that is to you. And so he talks about noticing the silence in the background, and his example was taking a walk through the woods. And he said, if you're taking a walk through the woods and you're by yourself, you're in a spot that there's not a lot of people. He's like, as you're walking, you may hear a bird, you may hear a small animal scurrying through the woods, you may hear your feet crunching in the leaves on the ground. But behind all of that is this huge sense of silence. There is something silent and reverent about being in nature. And so he said, it's that same thing if we can apply that type of situation to our normal everyday activities, that there's always that silence and that connection there. It's just sometimes harder to hear because we're distracted with all of these things in the foreground. And I thought that was a really good example, because I think many of us have probably had that experience where you're walking somewhere, you're out in nature, or even sitting in your home where there are noises, but it's almost like they can fall away and you hear just the silence behind it. He talked about that in today's world, we often find ourselves uncomfortable when we're experiencing silence, some people more than others. And so he's like, how many of you are either the person who does it, or someone who has to turn on the television when they're home alone, and they'll say things like, oh, it's just too quiet. I have to have noise. I have to turn on the TV. I have to have music playing. Or people who in a conversation get really uncomfortable if there's a moment of silence in between thoughts, and they'll just talk to fill the silence. And he says that is our mental noise resisting our connection to silence. So it's really the ego running interference, going, wait a minute. If you tap into the silence, you shut me off for a minute, and I'm your ego. I'm really important, and I want to tell you all the things that I want to tell you. And really, we know from other studies that the ego is there in our human experience a bit as a protection, right? Like that's, our ego sometimes keeps us alive in determining whether we need to fight, flight, freeze, do something in response to what's going on. But when we allow it to take over and become the determining factor of how we are living our lives, then we move farther away from our connection to inner source. And he says, without presence, your thoughts and emotions have you in their grip. And I thought that was an interesting way to put it. And I don't know if anyone's ever had the experience where you are, like, kind of thoughts and emotions are kind of taking over. They are in the foreground, and just what we call it sometimes our monkey mind, like just things are just spiraling and you're just thinking and thinking and thinking. And then something happens and you take a breath, or you experience just even a fraction of a moment of silence. And it's a little jar. You're like, whoa, wait, how did I allow that freight train to take off in my head? Like what was going on there? And so I think it's very true. Like we can kind of get in these modes where we move away from our consciousness. And so then we're like unconsciously allowing all of those things in the foreground to just be in charge. And so he says, as we increase our ability to connect to presence, so does our ability to witness thoughts and to refrain from letting them overpower us. And so that's the idea that, once you have the realization that our mind, our thoughts, our feelings, our experiences, that doesn't equal who we are. That isn't you at the core of your being. That isn't your true essence, these thoughts and feelings and things that you have. Then we begin to be that witness. We can step back and we can notice the thoughts that we're having. We can notice the emotions that we're having. And he says that this place of noticing, and we've talked about this in other teachings as well, it's kind of an unattached place where you become the observer of your own human experience, the observer of those thoughts and emotions. And he says, we may even be amused by what the mind is fixated on or what it's trying to get you to believe. Have you ever had that moment where you were in this thought pattern and you were just thinking, and then all of a sudden you go, I don't even know if that's true. Like, I have been thinking about this for the last hour and worried about how this is going to happen and what this is going to mean. And if I just get still for a moment, I don't even know if it's true. But I've been hijacked. My brain's been hijacked on this thought. And we've probably all experienced that at some point or another. And so he says also our ego will try to label past experiences and will then try to label yourself by way of it. So, those are the things. We've all had our past experiences, and it's a vast array of experiences. And what he's saying is ego also tries to put us in a box. Like, well, because you had that experience, because you, lived this life, well, then this must be true. You've got to anticipate all of these things in your future, or you are labeled like this is where you came from, and this is where you will stay, and this is how you will move through life. And so we put all of these things on, and some of those come from external sources. We buy into the belief that if I had that experience or I grew up a certain way, then I can't achieve something that maybe is a dream, or I think, have you ever heard someone label themselves as broken? Well, I'm just broken. I had these really hard life experiences and I'm broken. Well, once ego labels you and you buy into that label of broken, well, then that's how you're living your experience is I am a broken person living this experience. And so it really limits and changes the way you think about yourself and the way you think about current circumstance. And so he just says, that can really create a painful sense of self when those thoughts and labels are allowed to run unchecked. And so what's really happening there is that label and that thought has moved that person so far away from their inner source, like they haven't experienced that fully, or they don't have a practice of getting back there. Because as soon as you get to that place, your inner spirit says, we are not broken. We're fully whole right here all the time. Some things have happened, but that doesn't mean that you live through your life experience from that same place. And so connection to presence, to the source of who we truly are, divine mind, liberates us from this by creating awareness that we are not what happened. We are not those labels. We are not limited by any experience that we've had. I see a lot of like thinking faces. Yes. Does anybody have any thoughts regarding that? Yeah, Paul.
Okay. Is that coming through? Doesn't sound like it's on.
Hello? There we go. Okay. So when I've always had this real confusion, I guess you might say, about the ego, and then its counterpart, our spiritual mind. And, just really thinking about the ego, we need the ego. We need the ego to survive, to function, for, day in, day out interactions, and just our own things that we do. And but I went through a period where I had insomnia for about 2 years, and it was very serious. And I'd go through days sometimes, and if I got 2 hours of sleep in a night, I would consider it very lucky. And I really started working with Holy Spirit, on trying to heal this thing that is not easy to get out of. And I just let that Spirit kind of talk to me through that intuitive mind, And it's one thing that came to me one day was stop listening to the dark side of the ego. And from that point on, I see ego as really being more than just one-sided. It's not just one simple thing. It's actually there's the shadow side or the dark side, and then there's the neutral, I guess I would call it, ego. And then we have our spiritual mind. So that's how I kind of separated it, because I kind of like to work in boxes, maybe. And it's easier for me to then know where I'm at. Am I functioning from higher spirit? Am I functioning from that neutral place? Or am I functioning from the dark side of the ego? And then I can, quickly shift out of that if need be. Because it's so easy to slide into that anyway. That's what I want to say. Any other comments?
I love that this is what is being spoken of. So I'm reading a book that is similar. Rounds, and I wonder, does ego have anything to do with anxiety? You know what I mean? So if the ego is what helps you survive these things, and then later labels me as a survivor or whatever of some whatever. Anyway, it just had me thinking about that. But you're right about the silence. If you just take a moment and you realize that you've spun yourself into a kind of ridiculous frenzy in your mind, but nobody's noticing because you're just still going crazy in your mind a little bit. Anyway,
Right.
I just think it's really interesting.
Okay.
I like that you brought up how the ego can label you and you can buy into that agreement,
Mm-hmm.
But you can also you can break those agreements too.
Yes. And some of them can feel helpful and empowering, like you saying, a label of survivor. It depends on what feelings and emotions come with that. Because if your label of survivor is, I am strong, I am grounded, I have connection, I know that as I move through this human experience, even if there are circumstances that are less than favorable, I am a survivor. I will figure it out. I can do it. I can move through it. That's not an unhelpful thing to think. So it really, for me, it depends on what shackles does that thought put on you. And that's where, I would examine something if I was feeling limited by a thought that I was having. Then I go, okay, if I'm ever feeling limited, then that's not serving my highest good, because I know that my true essence is unlimited and abundant. So this thought I need to examine and really see how it's impacting my connection. Yeah, Brenda?
Yes, I think talking about the ego, if you really want to study about the ego, get A Course in Miracles and go through it. And all through the Course in Miracles, it talks about the ego.
So I have a little different take on what the ego is. So, of course, my belief is that we're in this great big L life, eternal life, playing life, creating life, amazing creators within that, experiencing life and expressing it. And so I don't see the ego as anything detrimental at all. The ego is kind of like, okay, we'll go to Star Trek, okay, so I come in here and I create a holodeck with all of these possibilities, and for this program I'm playing out. And that's maybe what I would call the ego, is that program. And I do it because I love to go play in the holodeck. I love the experience. And I go in there, and it's kind of pre-programmed in a way of what, there's this possible, this possible, this possible. And sometimes I might get caught up in the story that I have created for myself and forget that I'm the programmer. And so I could get into a story that is not so fun, and I really don't like where it's going. And the being in the presence for me is that going and going, oh, wait a minute, I'm the programmer. And so then I just come out of the story. If I don't like the way the story's going, I come out of the story, I remember I'm the programmer, and that's how I come out. And then I just kind of go, the logic has my back, knows what I want, and I can just relax into the next, and that reprograms it. It's the relaxing into it. As long as I'm fighting the story, I'm really still just in the story. But I come out of it, and to me, that's what it is. So the ego is just the story I'm telling myself right now, that's all. And there's no bad, it's just my story.
Yes, so that's awesome. That was a great analogy. I love analogies. And so exactly, like that's becoming the witness again, right? Like stepping out of that and going, oh, yes, I am a spiritual being and I am connected to this divine source. And yeah, this story is maybe not true, or it's not serving me, or it's just not fun anymore. Whatever that is. And I'm going to shift and move back into that knowing. That was a great, thanks, Wendy, for that. So, yes, Dawn, I'm sorry. I didn't realize.
You can only focus on one thing at a time. It's strange how we all seem to have a different view of what the ego really is. For me, it kind of comes with physicality. I like to think of myself as spirit clothed in a cloak of clay. And that inner me is always watching me, not condemning me, but watching me, and I'm watching myself, and the inherited ego is kind of a playing in the background sort of thing that doesn't really have my attention most of the time, because I'm conscious of the fact that I'm spirit, and that it becomes almost unimportant. That I know it's there, and my personality shows all the time, but I like to keep the idea that we are spirit having an experience here as physical beings temporarily. Mm-hmm. And that in reality, we are an essence, a spirit. And I just have to keep that in focus all the time.
Yeah, and I think that's awesome. And that is what Eckhart Tolle would say, that is presence. That is presence, that you can keep that in mind and know that, okay, today this human experience that I'm having, this is what it looks like, or this is my personality, like you're saying, but that having that connection at all times to the real underneath, the real presence, the real essence, like he would say, you are living in alert presence by doing that. Yes?
Yes, when I think of ego, first thing that comes to mind is edging God out. It's something where it can be a very negative, but it can also have a positive connotation. And a lot of times people will need to build up their own ego by putting other people down. And I've seen a lot of people that really have to have a high ego, but to get that, they just need to put other people down. Or I've seen other people that want everybody to be lifted up. And while they're lifting up their own ego, they can also be lifting other people's ego up. So when I think of ego, I think it could be both a positive or a negative concept, but most people that I've come across think of it negatively. So I think it can be looked at both ways.
Yeah, and if we look at our unity teaching, there is no good or bad, there just is, right? And so it really just depends on what labels we're putting on things. Like we do that. Spirit doesn't label it as good or bad. We, in our humanness, like to put labels of this is good, this is bad. Because you can, and I think Sue's talked about it before too, that you could look at I'm not coming up with an example right in my mind, but there's something that you could look at where one person doing this action, you would say, oh, that's not good for them, or that's not good for, we might label it as saying not good. But another person in different circumstances doing that same action or having that same thought, we would think, oh, yeah, that's exactly what they need to be doing right now. So it's all a matter of perspective and what labels we put on it or what circumstances we're swimming in at the time. So the other thing he says we have to do to become more present is become friendly with the now moment. And so no surprise, Eckhart he was laughing at one of this. He's like, of course I'm going to talk about the now moment because I'm the now guy. And so he just really says we have to work within the present moment as much as possible, looking to what this moment is presenting. And so he says, there is just this. And then just this, and then just this. And that really life is happening in this now moment. The only, life is not happening in what has been. That's already done. It's the creation of that has already happened. What's happening in the future, or what will happen in the future, it's not here yet. It happens from this now moment. The action that we take in this now moment, the thought that we take in this now moment creates what we experience moving forward. So really, life is only happening in this now moment. This is when you are most alive, when your thought is most connected, is in this now moment. And so he speaks of alert presence, which is perceiving without the interference of thought. And again, he talks about like taking that walk. And, he says alert presence, the difference is, he was talking about walking across a campus. And he said, so if you're going from building A to building B and it's a 3-minute walk, he said the person, when you're not present to the now moment, you may make that walk. Your mind is having all kinds of thoughts about what you're going to do next week or what happened yesterday. And you may get to building B and you remember nothing of the walk from building A to building B because you had blocked out everything around you because your mind was living inside itself, having this conversation with itself or having a remembrance or having anxiety about what's coming up or whatever that is. And you've missed everything that was going on around you in that 3-minute walk. And so he talks about alert presence is taking that walk and being present to the things around you. It was interesting. He talked about that he said, if you're walking through nature and you're noticing, and you're like, oh, that's a beautiful tree. He says, what our mind wants to do is go, oh, I think that's an elm tree. Elm trees, blah, 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 blah. And then we get off on, or I wonder, there's certain diseases that elm trees can have. Oh, do I see any of that in that tree? And so our mind kind of takes over. And he says, when we're looking around and being present to the moment, we don't have to label everything. It just is. Like, we can just experience the vastness of our current experience without labeling everything as a thing or having a thought about everything we see. We can just observe it and notice it. And he said, and when we do that, we really open ourselves to the beauty of this human experience we are having as a spiritual being, that we may recognize like relationships that are happening within our periphery. Oh, look, those people, they look very, they look very happy, or that's wonderful. Oh, human connection. And we can have like some broad ideas, but he said when we try to narrow it down and like start to label things or have too many thoughts about it, he said it's like snapping our consciousness right back into or out of the presence of who we are. But if instead we're walking through as an observer and just how magnificent is this life, and looking at the beauty of things around us, that is us being the manifestation of divine mind experiencing this realm.
So many years before I ever got into the metaphysical, my metaphysical journey, I would do my grandmother's hair, and she had long, long hair, and I would do it, I'd wash it and do everything, spend the night, and then put it up. And one day when I was doing her hair, I went into a place where I could have lived in that moment for eternity and been happy. And no, I don't know what it was, but it was just like, and it seemed like it lasted an eternity. So I had that experience that I knew there was that there somewhere. And in the metaphysical journey, I began to understand that's I can reproduce that. I'm learning how to reproduce that. And one of the ways I do that is when I'm standing in line, I go, I'm saying to myself as I'm standing in line, the place where I stand is a very good place. Heaven is here now. Right in this moment I'm standing here. And one time I have a man in front of me that's having problems. It's the secondhand blind store, and his house is burning. He's trying to figure paperwork out and do all this. And he turns to me and he says, I'm so sorry I haven't taken all this time or anything. And I just looked at him. I said, the place where I stand is a very good place. Heaven is here now. And he goes, and he just looks at me and goes, can I touch your face? And he reaches down and touches my face. And I said, can I touch your face? And he was very tall. Can I touch your face? And we're sitting there staring in each other's eyes. And that moment is there, that moment I had with my grandmother. And it doesn't have to be a silent moment, because in the same thing, I've been in line at the dollar store one day, and a young Down syndrome man, about 30 years old, is behind me. We both have Cheetos. Oh my gosh, we got into the amazing restorative power of Cheetos and how they're the most healthy food, and we did the Cheetos dance. And so it wasn't a silent moment, it was a very active moment, but it was the same moment. And that's something in metaphysics we can learn, is that we can consciously create the moment. It's not something we just have to hope we get somewhere.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And it's that connection, that recognition, the Christ in me sees the Christ in you, that we are all divinely connected. Yeah. And so he talks about that we often miss our opportunities for such presence by allowing thoughts to hijack the current moment. And he talked about this type of trudging through life. And so he was saying when you're carrying all of those past experiences, you're carrying all that that self-concept and all those thoughts around. He's like, we're kind of trudging through life, and we're going from point A to point B, and it gets real heavy sometimes, and we're just kind of trudging through cement in a way, and that when we're doing that, it often puts us in a state of reaction. So we're in this state of constantly, I'm reacting to what just happened, or I'm anticipating what will happen, and I'm reacting to that before it even happens, because I'm stuck in this place of reaction. And so he says, when we are in the present moment, or when we're present to the moment, or whatever form this moment is taking, that is when we can come from a place of response instead. And that is because we are present to that connection with our intelligent source. And when we're present to that, the response is because that intelligent source is letting us know what action is needed in this now moment. And we're doing Prosperity Plus right now, and I'm doing that. And one of the things Mary Morrissey talks about is doing what you can with what you have from this now moment. And I really thought about that there, that is a connection to source, going, okay, so you can have the dream, you can have the future thing that you are creating, but she always says you have to create it in this now moment. You can't create it in the future, or it will always be in the future. You have to create it in this now moment. And sometimes that is taking just one small step in this now moment that moves the needle just a little bit closer and a little bit closer to that, because you have to believe that those things are happening. They're already here in this now moment. It's already given to you. It's already possible. It's already created for you from right now. And that's just really a powerful thought. And so, in Unity, we often discuss that everything we need is there inside of us and available to us through our connection to Spirit. And this just really, I think we talk about that a lot. And then going into this, Eckhart says presence is getting still enough to be aware that it's there and it's available to you at all times. And that you have to be aware enough and connected enough to allow the communication. And he talked a little bit, he gave an example, and it really made me think, how often are you talking to someone and you have something that you feel is really important or might be really helpful, and either like they won't stop talking long enough for you to be able to share that, or you do share it and they kind of go, okay, no, that's not what I need right now. And they go on and you're thinking, oh, but this is really important. And sometimes I think about like, that's how Spirit is with us, right? Like Spirit is sitting there and going, excuse me, if you would just pay attention to your connection with me. Like I could help you out here. I could give you a way that you could respond that would be serving your higher self, or I see your dream and I support it. And I've got some action you could take. And we go, who are you? No, I'm not listening to that right now. Or we don't slow down enough to listen. And so that's something I'm definitely, like I said, it's my white stone word. I'm trying, I'm focusing some practice on slowing down and having that moment of stillness and becoming more aware. And it doesn't mean that, like him talking about, we're not trying to lift above thought, or it's not that we want to be, Buddha-like individuals. The goal is not for all of us to be sitting around in lotus position, because then we're not experiencing life that's around us, right? Some moments like that are helpful to make our life experience more robust, and for us to truly do the work that is ours to do here as manifestations of spirit having this experience. Like, this is how Source experiences the world, is through us. We are those beings. And so, having that connection just makes it, like I said, a more robust experience. That's when we can, I'm going to use Wendy because I know she's talking about, like, that we play the game better, or we figure out that we go, oh, this is a really fun way to experience my human life, is by, I can do this, or I can have this thought, and look what I can create. And that can become fulfilling. It can be fun. It helps us connect to the oneness of everyone around. Got off script there because I got excited. Sorry. So I wanted to end today with just a short meditation to bring us in to a present moment, so we can start our practice right now of becoming connected. And so I would have you close your eyes if you feel comfortable. Feel your body in this present moment. Feel your body in this chair. Feel your body in this room. Become aware of your breath. Fill your lungs with a deep breath and release. Release any tension that you may be feeling in your neck, your jaw, your shoulders, wrists, fingers, your hips, knees, ankles, toes. Notice the silence outside of your body. Notice the inner silence, where the essence of your true self resides. I still my body. I still my mind. I relax. I surrender my current life form and my outer circumstances. In this state of presence, I listen. In this silence, I feel connection to divine mind, spirit, God, oneness. From this place, I know that life is happening in this now moment, and I am divinely guided. When you're ready, come back to your breath. Open your eyes. Thank you for, I love being in meditation with the group, but there's also a moment when you're leading a meditation and you get to look out and see those in the room experiencing that is just such a beautiful experience. Like I feel tears because just looking at the beauty of all of you. So, love you.
I'd like everybody to give Amy a big round of applause. Amy always gives an A+ talk, and I thank you every time you come in.
Thank you.
Because it's always such a blessing to have you here.
Thank you.
Besides being our board president and everything, too. Everything else that you do. First of all, before I do say the announcements, I just want to remind everybody, if you like what you're hearing, if you really like what Unity does, if you like to participate in things like this, put it in the energy of the money in the basket back there too. We do survive and thrive, and off that financial support that we all need. So next week, July 3rd, the New Thought in World Religions class, which is this, will not meet due to the picnic. Next Sunday, the third after service, we will celebrate the 4th of July with a picnic. So come next week, planning to enjoy our picnic here. The church will provide hamburgers, hot dogs, and buns. We'd like you to bring dishes and desserts that will go with the hamburgers and hot dogs. Dress casual, even for church. And I know after the church service or during the church service, they're going to be taking a hand count of whether you want a meat meal or a vegetarian meal, so I'm not going to do that here. Amy, we have an update from the board president. I don't know if you want to say that now or.
Oh, I think that's for service.
Okay.
Yep.
So we're going to work on that. So
And I believe if the temperatures are going to be too hot, like there will be inside, you'll be able to eat at the picnic. It'll be an indoor picnic if it's going to be scorchingly hot outside, or there's the picnic
we have
tables
tables
also.
in the back
Yeah,
there,
I don't
too.
want anyone to worry about looking and thinking, oh, I can't sit outside in a picnic. It's going to be too hot. Well,
all right. So if we can't.
Safe for rain.
yes, same for rain. Yeah.
Good.
The picnic meal will happen regardless of the weather,
Good.
whether it be indoor or outdoor.
We'll make
yes.
sure you're comfortable.
Yes.
If we can't get in the back, traditionally, we love to be in a circle, and I don't know, Amy, are you going to close us out?
Sure.
Okay, great.